Have we just given up on balancing our constructed formats? I've recently been getting into Standard, and it's arguably one of the worst times to do so, with Red being almost at a 50% representation in some time periods. Quarry Steel Cutter is a surprisingly resilient threat. Coming out of Tarkir Dragonstorm, it's made it so even Modern has a top tier Is It Prowess deck, as well as Legacy surprisingly having one that can put up results. But in today's video, I wanted to showcase how this might actually be a larger mismanagement issue. Many of you only play 1 to 2 constructed formats, but many of the problems you're going through are actually being experienced by almost all of the other 60 card formats. This is again a larger mismanagement issue that we see kind of exacerbated in Standard, maybe a little bit of Pioneer, but it has been going on for many players for Pauper and Modern in many ways. So let's talk some aggro menace. And also, if I sound a little nasally, I'm sick as heck, and YouTube content creation doesn't have a great sick day policy, so we trudge through. Some of you have to be so tired at this point of me just starting all of my content through some type of Twitter post, but look, I just want to bring the news of what's going on here. Standard Challenge Top 8. This was from a couple of days ago here, June 7th. Robert posting about how Mono Red and Red itself essentially took all 8 of the decks. So Red itself, whether it be Mono Red aggro winning 1st, 3rd, and 8th, the top 8 was then completed out by Is It Prowess 2nd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. The top 8 is dominated by Red in a recent Standard Challenge. Now, notably, 47 players, maybe not the biggest sample size out there, but it does speak to a larger issue. And one that I wanted to speak of in the context of some pro players in a recent video I did, talking about how, Corey and Jim telling everyone to just get good. Now, obviously, there's larger context to that video, and I hope I outlined it in that video as well, because if we take a look at this video here, it's from this clip. So again, approximately at this video that I'm going to link down below, 159.52, I think we can kind of listen to what they say again.
Cards that haven't seen play in a while to attack the metagame in a different avenue. You can do all these things to attack, the most played deck, the popular deck, and go from that instead of, oh, this deck's the best, we need to ban it. Because, here is a spoiler, and I know this is, going to be tough to hear for everyone. Jim, there's always going to be a best deck.
That is true, yeah. The burden of proof is on the players, where you got to give it some time.
Yeah.
You got to give players time to cook, If we go through a month and it's still, crushing everything, and hey, we had a month, players tried for a month in major events to beat it and couldn't, okay.
Breach, in a nutshell,
We can have a discussion then.
Yeah.
But give players a chance,
Yeah. Breach in a...
So that's why I want to kind of point out that sometimes this clip is being taken a little bit out of context. Yes, it's a little wild to just tell players to get good, but they, in all fairness, are telling people to try. So for example, Final Fantasy is just about to be released in people's hands already through pre-release. Give it some time for Final Fantasy to enter the metagame. Maybe there is some type of secret deck or card that really flips things upside its head, and we really don't need to ban anything out of Red. Right now, the metagame is really around playing Red or answering Red, and so people have made quote-unquote adaptations, but we already see challenges where things are being completely warped in these limited sample size that we're using as content creators to exacerbate a point. We see top 8 being melded by time to change, time to adapt, and how people aren't able to, and they just, when the going gets tough, you just join them, if anything. So when it comes to Final Fantasy, I agree, let the set come in and let people try. Notably with the last ban announcement that happened, we know that some of these decisions can happen a couple weeks in advance. For example, the Pauper ban that they specifically cited actually was made well in advance, about 2 to 3 weeks in advance of the ban announcement. Does that happen for Standard, Modern, whatever specifically? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but that seems to be the general consensus here. So maybe we're already at that point in June, where come June 30th, we are going to be banning something out of Red. But I do think there should be time for at least Final Fantasy to cook something up. We do have rotation coming up for Standard as well, so that could mean a big change. And likely some of these cards were developed at a time when 3-year Standard wasn't really something that they were thinking about. 3-year Standard was still, to my knowledge, a relatively recent thing, especially with foundations and everything. So some of the cards that are in Standard right now weren't thought to have stuck around in Standard or designed to be so and interact with some of these larger pieces in the long term. So there is some give and take here, and I do want to be completely honest about that and not just completely ignore some of those facts, and just bring, again, highlighting the point that yes, they are telling players to get good, but they do say give some time to kind of try things out. If a deck is ultimately still at the top of the metagame, just like Corey's talking about with the aforementioned Modern Breach combo, if people do get time to test things out and it's still at the top of the metagame, maybe something does need to go. But I will say they did use that same logic and not ban anything out of Energy. They banned something out of Breach, they banned Underworld Breach, but they didn't ban something out of Energy, and Energy continues to be the most represented deck in the Modern format by a mile, and every other deck around it kind of looks to answer that. Just look at the amount of combo decks that are at the top of the metagame that are solely there because they can beat up on the Energy decks. Just saying, when the metagame is completely warped around a certain strategy, just like we saw with the legacy metagame that largely hasn't changed at this point, that's a whole other discussion. Maybe we need to make changes ASAP. I doubt kind of standard goes away for too long. Now, looking at this metagame, past 30 days, we see that almost 30% of the metagame is it prowess, and approximately 10% more is red. So red aggro is almost 40% of the metagame. If we go to 7 days and cherry pick our data a little bit, we see that mono red plus is it prowess is pretty much 50% of the metagame. In the last 7 days, half of the metagame is just red. You will just be getting beat down. That is all 50% of the metagame is, just red aggro. Now, that's being a little disingenuous with is it prowess, but you know what I'm talking about here. Aggro-based strategies are at the top, and the rest of the metagame is around beating these aggro strategies. Now, there are some key cards that can make a good headway against these matchups, but you ultimately still need an I win button. For those of you legacy players, you might actually understand this concept a little bit as well. When it came to previous metagames, or maybe even currently, you are realizing that combo decks or decks that have maybe a mid-range aspect but have like a quote-unquote I win button, some type of crazy exacerbated play, whether it be like a painter combo or like a reanimating a giant creature, it needs to have a quote-unquote I win button that can get over top, because the top of the metagame is really fast. Now, in Legacy, that's a combo deck of oops all spells. In Standard, Modern, whatever, these tend to be the aggressive strategies. Now, notably, when it comes to Modern, Boros Energy isn't necessarily super aggressive. It just does everything really well. It's a creature-based mid-range aggro deck that just has a insane threat package at every single converted mana cost, that doing like 3-4 things at a time, and an absolutely busted late game. So again, every single every single constructed metagame now seems to be defined by one deck, although Pauper is a little bit different. I want to highlight that in a second as well. When it comes to is it aggro, we see that Drake Hatcher, Monastery Swift Spear, and Corey Steel Cutter are the kind of weapons of choice here. Sometimes we do have the Slick Shot Show Off as well. A lot of people kind of arguing whether or not that card is good in the matchup. You know, I'll let those standard players go back and forth. But when it comes to answering something like this, you see a lot of the threats that are out for something like this, especially, you know, Storm Chaser Silent as an enchantment. One of the best cards to answer this is actually Temporary Lockdown out of Standard. White, and 1 for an enchantment that says when this enchantment enters, exile each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. So kind of like a board wipe O-ring style effect. And when it comes to decks like this is a big incentive to be in white, not only for the white's threat packages and threats such as Beza or some of the impending enchantments, but Temporary Lockdown is a good way to kind of slow the board down. But when you take points from your legacy style win conditions, you realize that you again can control the board to any point, but you can't be like the lands players that play to late. Control decks aren't really that popular right now. It doesn't really benefit you from playing out to an extremely long case. So you instead go for a combo win condition. This is where it leads to me learning Standard through specifically Azorius Omniscience. Now, this deck is in large ways playing Solitaire as well. I recognize that in many ways. But it is the only way to beat red, in my opinion, if you're not playing red. It is the best way to do so. It has great game against many other decks. And honestly, it does get answered pretty well. So the whole combo is, for those of you that don't understand, you obviously might know Omniscience, a card that, you know, when it's on the battlefield 10 mana, you may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. You may, so for example, if you have a spell that does require you, gives a benefit for the amount of mana you use to cast it, you don't have to cast it for 0, you may. So just keep that in mind. Regardless, you can play a bunch of things for free. Then what you do is you get into your graveyard, right? So you're going to be playing the front side of something like Meringue River Regent that says 4 mana, draw 3 cards and discard 1. Maybe Philology Archaeologist that gets you to mill the top 3 cards of your deck, and you may put a non-creature, non-land card from among them into your hand. If you don't, it gets a 1/1 counter. So largely, if you put an Omniscience in there, you're going to keep it there. And then you have one card called Abuelo's Awakening, 4 mana for a sorcery that says you may return target artifact or non-aura enchantment from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it becomes a 1/1 spirit token. So there are some weaknesses. You put the Omniscience in your graveyard, you reanimate it with Abuelo's Awakening, it becomes a 1/1 creature. So there are some balanced aspects to it. You can actually just like bolt or removal the Omniscience. So there's that. But you do play cards like Scroll Shift, where if your opponent goes to remove it, you can cast Scroll Shift for 0 now that the Omniscience is out and flicker it so that it comes back as an enchantment in response to some removal, and Scroll Shift replaces itself. So there are some powerful cards to this deck. The way you win is playing something like not the Rolling Dragonstorm, but Meringue River Regent. So you can play this for 0 on its front side. When this creature enters, return up to 2 other target non-land permanents to the owner's hand, so you can clear the board. This also triggers Rolling Dragonstorm that pays for 2, draw 2 cards and discard a card. But also when you play a dragon, you can bounce the Rolling to your hand, so you can continue to draw through your deck. I like to play Jace the Perfected Mind in here. 2 Meringue River Regents just completes a win here. So for example, if you played 1 Meringue River Regent, you can return the Jace the Perfected Mind to your hand, play the Jace for 0, -4, mill your opponent for 4 × 3, and then play the other Meringue, bounce one of the Meringue River Regents and then the other Jace, and then you just complete the loop over and over again. So that's a basic way that you can win the game in a situation like this. Regardless, you could also do this with, for example, it's something like Kutzel Flanker. Put a 1/1 counter on Kutzel Flank for each creature that left the battlefield under your control this turn. So this is a great way to create like a giant threat. And also it can gain you a bunch of life against the aggro decks if you don't have an exact way to win, and then exile target player's graveyard. So it's great in the mirror as well. So there's a lot of ways that you can win with this deck out of the board. You even bring in Overlord of the Mistmores because people have like a combo hate. So you just play this kind of mid-range threat package. Regardless, you control the game with temporary lockdown. You win with some type of combo instant win button, and that's how you beat the red decks. That's just it. Because it's not about holding them off in the long game. And we've seen that in many metagames. We've seen that even when it came to the Breach decks, yes, you can stop Breach, but they'll still have many other ways to combo off. They'll still have many other win conditions. It's not just about stopping Breach in one way. You have to do it in many others. They'll bring in multiple win conditions. You have to play like Surgical Extraction out of like mill decks. Like that is the only reliable way to get rid of some of these. Otherwise, you're just counting 1 card at a time. And you're not faster than them. You're not faster than them, I should say. And so we see that in Legacy, we saw that in Modern, and we saw that in Pauper as well. And now we're seeing it replicated in the standard environment. I mean, heck, when you take a look at Pauper, if we look at the Wayback Machine, before the most recent ban announcement that happened, the top of the Pauper metagame was Burn, Jund Broodscale, right? And Grixis Affinity by a mile, right? So you had the combo deck, right? You had the Burn deck at the top, which was absolutely insane. It was lightning fast, super consistent. And it was even cited to have a near 70% game 1 win rate. And yes, that drops significantly post board, but it puts you in such a bad position because now you, as the opponent, had to win 2 games in a row. That meant that if the Burn player was likely to win 70% of the time, at some point they will be back on the play. And that is exactly what they want. They'll be back on the play. You will not be able to hold up your Weather the Storm to stop this. And so with that, you had the combo decks out of there. Grixis Affinity essentially is just, honestly, it's just a combo deck because you're cheating on mana. Things that you're just playing free crap, and you have so much resiliency out of the deck, so many answers, and honestly a really good aggressive line as well. It was just a solid tempo deck, and it still is in many ways without Deadly Dispute. You played Bogles because this deck is just dummy thick. You put Lifelink on a creature, you put Trample on it, it's probably big enough. It's going to be able to beat Burn in many other strategies. Mono Blue Fairies continues to be the tempo deck of choice. But that was the Deadly Dispute era and the Burn era at the time when they were playing the whole Cold Dota lines, making it like go wide with Burn, and it was a board-based strategy. Now Burn post-ban is a more, kind of tempo-ish style strategy. There's Madness Burn, which looks to discard cards, but then there's traditional Burn with Kessig Flamebeather and the Thermal Alchemist as well, where you cast spells and you deal damage for each instant or sorcery spell you cast every time you do it, like pings for 1. And so that's why right now, Pauper is honestly in a better place. Yes, Burn is at the top. You can say that Burn is functionally 20% of the meta, and the next represented situation is 10. But I will say that in many ways these decks do play differently. I'm going to say that with an asterisk. Madness Burn is a lot slower but more explosive, but even Burn right now is actually relatively consistent. It actually does have a late game engine, especially in Thermal Alchemist, that can untap and deal 1 damage at all points. So even if you're unable to attack or unable to cast things through counter spells, they do need to have removal for your onboard threats. Even if your spell doesn't resolve, the Keswick Flame Breather triggers and the Thermal Alchemist triggers, and you're able to go off that way. So again, Burn technically is 20% of the metagame, but I would argue these decks play differently, although are solved in similar ways. With that, there is a quote-unquote control mid-range strategy of Jund Wildfire, a tempo mid-range strategy in Blue Terror, tempo in Grixis Affinity, tempo aggro combo, aggro High Tide is combo. I'm actually surprised High Tide is this far up in the combo. In the metagame itself, because it's so easy to answer, mono white aggro as well. So there actually is a relatively good breadth and diversity of things. Things do change, aggro still at the top. So just because you make a change, unless you completely gut it, it doesn't mean that red won't be at the top, but the whole metagame warping around that won't happen. So we banned the whole combo out of Pauper, took Burn down a peg, and so we do see some differences. For example, Jund Wildfires is still at the top, but the package is different because they're not playing Deadly Dispute, which is a big difference. Grixis Affinity will always be at the top as long as we still have these tapped artifact lands. That's a whole other discussion. And Blue Terror in many ways is still up there as well. Like Fairies is still up there. Blue Terror presents like a really good threat package. So in many ways, I may be trying to defend Pauper, but there are elements of it that many other constructed formats are dealing with right now. There's a best deck, it's a best deck by miles, and the format is warping around it in many ways, where the best deck is an aggro deck. We are printing so many hyper efficient aggressive threats and aggressive cards and damage dealing or win conditioning type cards that other decks are having to adapt their win conditions to be more control, but then like an insta win. So for example, with something like Blue Terror, you're playing Tolarian Terror, which is a 1 mana 5/5. You're playing Cryptic Serpent, which is a 2 mana 6/5. And so you're having to play this control game with brainstorms and counterspells and whatever, and then dropping these like really hyper efficient, powerful threats that your opponents have to be able to block, or in the long game, you will be able to win the game. So you're taking that long game away from Burn if you're able to control them in the early game. Again, with Hydro Blast and Blue Elemental Blast in the format, you are just going to be able to counter out the key spells and then hopefully tempo them out from there. The aggro versus I win button mid-range strategies are happening to exist in all other formats. Now, even in Legacy, out of a recent challenge, we're seeing that on June 8th, Is It Prowess also took it down. It's wild. Corey Steelcutter, Mishra's Bauble, Brazen Borrower Dragon, Murktide Tameo, Brainstorm Daze, Force of Will, Bolt. You got the whole package. You even got Stifles in there. It's barely Is It Prowess. It's really just Corey Steelcutter. Dragon's Rage Channeler, that's something different, okay? Regardless, control, mid-range, or sorry, I should say this is a tempo package leveraging a kind of, honestly, it's weird because Corey Steelcutter ideally is like one of the better threats out there. It kind of does a soft job of being a monastery mentor, and it like honestly is better in some ways because it gives the creature haste. So if you're able to create multiples throughout, like by the time it gets back to your turn, these threats are really powerful. And the tokens themselves have prowess itself, so it allows you to proactively brainstorm, proactively cast certain spells, and powers up your removal even more to be able to attack and then cast your removal spells to be able to proactively remove your opponent's stuff. It just hyper powers your interaction and makes it so using them proactively is even better and is rewarded instead of being defensive. So that's why something like Corey Steelcutter is great here. Not that this deck is necessarily at the top of the metagame, just highlighting how even Legacy has an aspect of Is It Prowess in its metagame. Now, this is where ultimately the video, I kind of leave it up to you. What do you think about the standard metagame right now? Again, I'm personally learning it through Azorius Omniscience, and I see a whole lot of red decks. It is a really hard time to get in on the metagame right now. But with 22 days until, or kind of less at this point, up until the next banned and restricted announcement, what are you feeling about changes in different kind of formats? I personally am looking to get into Pioneer at some point, and I'll probably be doing it through a combo deck. And so with that in mind, I'm starting to get my foot into almost every 60 card format out there. The popular ones, at least: Standard, Pioneer, Pauper, Modern, and Legacy, maybe Vintage at some point properly. But regardless, I'm starting to see these play patterns arise in different formats. I'm starting to see a similar thing. And I'm starting to wonder if this is like overall design. Sometimes we don't see the same cards. Sometimes we do in these weird niche cases, of course, Steel Cutter. But we're starting to see hyper efficient design and threats that are really fast and low to the ground kind of dominate in the world of aggressive strategies and burn decks. And we're starting to see how metagames all throughout different constructed strategies are looking to warp around these type of things. How decks are looking to have an I win instant win button in all strategies, not just Legacy and oops all spells. We see it in Modern in some ways, maybe not so much now, but we do see warping around a top deck at the top of the metagame. And how, if honestly in Modern, if the energy deck was knocked down a peg, a lot of these combo decks wouldn't see as much play because the combo decks have a really good matchup against them. Sometimes even Eldrazi as well. And Eldrazi just beats up on those decks at like the, I should say the Modern energy decks in many ways as well, but is kind of held down a peg by the Is It Prowess deck at the top as well. Because if you're playing like the Karn the Great Creator versions of it, you're probably just taking the Elday Is It Prowess anyway. So regardless, when it comes to constructed formats, we see the patterns. What do you think in the comment section down below? Let me know how you're feeling about your constructed formats that you're playing. Are you, did I misrepresent at any point? Do you feel like there is no pattern? I'm reaching for the stars and trying to find connections and things that don't exist. Am I tinfoil hatting and conspiracy theorying or whatever? Let me know in the comment section down below. And I'm hoping that on June 30th, we get some type of positive change.